The school hallways buzzed with restless energy. It was the start of a new semester, and gossip traveled faster than the morning bell. Everyone had heard the rumors. A new teacher was coming, young, fresh out of university, and supposedly too soft to handle the notorious troublemakers who had ruled the hallways for years. The group, Dylan, Marcus, and Tyler, weren't just bullies, they were a storm. They tested every teacher, mocked every substitute, and had gotten rid of more staff than the principal dared admit. To them, a new teacher wasn't an authority figure, it was prey. So when the new teacher, Miss Carter, walked in, their eyes lit with the thrill of a fresh hunt. She wasn't what they expected. She was in her mid-20s, soft brown hair pulled neatly into a bun, eyes calm yet sharp, and her clothing plain but neat. She carried no air of superiority, no sign of nervousness, only a quiet presence that seemed to ripple through the classroom without her saying a word. At first, the students whispered, trying to size her up. Dylan leaned back in his chair, feet up on the desk, smirking. Marcus cracked his knuckles loudly, as though daring her to react. Tyler whistled under his breath, crude and dismissive. But Miss Carter said nothing. She simply set her books down, wrote her name on the board in even strokes, and turned to face the class with a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Let's begin." The bullies laughed. No teacher had ever survived their first week. They lived for breaking spirits, for making authority figures tremble in front of the class. And to them, Miss Carter looked like a lamb led straight into the wolf's den. That day, they started small, snide remarks, paper airplanes, mocking coughs every time she spoke. She didn't bite back, didn't raise her voice, didn't show irritation. Instead, she moved through the lesson as though their noise didn't matter. The class was divided. Some students admired her composure, while others whispered that she was weak. Dylan grinned and whispered to Marcus, "We'll have her crying by Friday." Marcus chuckled darkly. "She won't last that long." By the third day, their attacks grew bolder. A chair tipped accidentally. Books fell deliberately. They mocked her clothing, her voice, her age. Tyler made jokes about her being too young to teach, while Marcus spread rumors that she had no control over her classroom. The weaker kids, inspired by their antics, joined in the laughter. Miss Carter remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that wasn't weakness. It was patience. As if she were waiting for something. The breaking point came on Friday. It was during the last class of the week, when everyone's energy was high and discipline was at its lowest. Dylan decided to test her completely. As she turned to write on the board, he shoved a desk hard enough to crash against the wall. The bang echoed like a gunshot, and the whole class erupted in laughter. Miss Carter froze, chalk in hand, then set it down slowly. She turned, her expression unreadable. "Who pushed that desk?" she asked softly. "Not me," Dylan said with mock innocence. "Maybe it just fell." Tyler laughed. "Yeah, desks are clumsy like that." Marcus leaned back, arms crossed, smirking. "Maybe you should ask the janitor to discipline it." The class laughed louder. It was a circus now, and the bullies were the ringmasters. Miss Carter simply nodded, her calmness making Dylan frown. "All right then," she said. "I suppose it's time." She walked to the center of the room, setting her books aside. Her movements were deliberate, quiet, almost graceful. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Time for what? You quitting already?" She tilted her head slightly, eyes locked on him. "No. Time for the lesson you've all been waiting for." Something in her tone made the laughter falter. A ripple of unease passed through the class. Dylan smirked, trying to shake it off. "What, are you gonna cry? Run to the principal." Miss Carter didn't answer. She stepped closer, her calm presence suddenly heavy, like a storm cloud rolling in. For the first time, Dylan felt something unfamiliar, a twinge of doubt. She looked around the room, eyes sweeping over every student. "I've been patient," she said quietly, "because I wanted to give you all the chance to show respect. But respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes, it's demanded." Her voice wasn't raised, yet it silenced the room. She walked toward Dylan's desk, and instead of stepping back, he shoved his chair loudly, standing up to tower over her. He was taller, broader, the so-called king of the school. He sneered. "You don't scare me. You're just another teacher who'll run out crying." She tilted her head again, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Is that so?" Before anyone could blink, it happened. In one fluid motion, she shifted her stance, swept his feet out from under him, and pinned him to the ground with a speed no one had ever seen. The room gasped as Dylan, 6 feet of muscle and arrogance, was flat on his back, Miss Carter kneeling lightly beside him, calm as ever. His face burned with shock and humiliation. He tried to scramble up, but she pressed 2 fingers against his wrist in a way that made him wince in sudden pain. "Control," she said softly, looking down at him. "It isn't about size, it's about discipline." She let go, standing smoothly, leaving him scrambling back to his chair, red-faced and shaken. Marcus jumped to his feet, furious.
"What the hell was that?"
He lunged toward her, fists raised, but she moved like lightning. A sidestep, a twist of her arm, and he was on his knees, gasping from a pressure point hold. Tyler hesitated, then tried to rush her from behind. She spun, her legs sweeping in a precise arc that knocked the chair he'd grabbed clean out of his hands. The class screamed in shock and awe. In less than 60 seconds, the bullies who had terrorized the school for years were on the floor, groaning, stunned, their arrogance shattered. Miss Carter stood tall, breathing steady, her eyes calm but blazing with authority. "I don't tolerate cruelty," she said, her voice ringing through the stunned silence. "Not in my classroom, not in my school. If you think you can break me, you'll only end up breaking yourselves." She looked at Dylan, Marcus and Tyler, who now stared at her wide-eyed, their swagger gone. "Now," she said softly, "apologize to the class." And they did. Faces burning, voices shaking, the 3 bullies mumbled apologies, not just to her but to everyone. The students who had once admired them now watched in disbelief as their idols crumbled. In 60 seconds, the entire hierarchy of the school had changed. That day, whispers spread through the hallways like wildfire. The new teacher wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile. She was unstoppable. And by the end of the week, Miss Carter wasn't just respected. She was legendary. To Chapter 2A, the deeper lesson. The Monday after the showdown, the atmosphere in school was different. Students who had once laughed at the bullies now looked at them with a mix of pity and amusement. Dylan walked the halls with his head down, Marcus avoided eye contact, and Tyler barely spoke. The balance of power had shifted, and the shockwave of Miss Carter's 60 seconds of dominance had left a permanent mark. But Miss Carter knew this was only the beginning. Breaking their arrogance was one thing. Teaching them a true lesson, that was the real challenge. The bullies couldn't shake the humiliation. Dylan nursed a bruised ego worse than the ache in his wrist. Marcus replayed the moment over and over, furious at himself for being brought to his knees. Tyler couldn't forget the look in her eyes, calm, confident, unshakable. They tried to act tough, but their classmates no longer feared them. Their throne was gone, and beneath their anger was something they couldn't admit: respect. Miss Carter didn't gloat. She didn't mention the incident. She returned to her usual quiet demeanor, teaching lessons with patience and clarity. The class was attentive now, not out of fear, but out of admiration. Even the most restless students listened. Yet Miss Carter noticed Dylan, Marcus, and Tyler sitting in the back, restless, angry, their pride still raw. She understood. Humiliation could either break someone or open the door to growth. She was determined to make it the latter. So she started planting seeds. One day during class, she brought up the concept of discipline. "Discipline," she said, "isn't punishment, it's power. Power over yourself, your impulses, your anger. Real strength isn't about hurting others. It's about controlling yourself when you could." Her eyes flicked toward the bullies, not accusingly, but knowingly. They shifted uncomfortably, but something in her tone lingered. Later that week, she introduced an after-school activity, a self-defense workshop. Most assumed it was just a fun exercise, but Dylan, Marcus, and Tyler knew it was more. She was offering them a choice: stay humiliated or learn. At first they scoffed, but when they overheard other students praising Miss Carter's skill, curiosity gnawed at them. Against their pride, they showed up. The gym was quiet when they arrived. Miss Carter stood barefoot on the mat, calm as ever. "I'm glad you came," she said simply. They muttered excuses, pretending they were just curious, but she didn't push. Instead, she began teaching the basics: stances, balance, awareness. They resisted at first, joking, rolling their eyes. But as she demonstrated movements with precise control, something shifted. They saw not just a teacher, but a warrior. And deep down, they wanted that strength for themselves. Weeks passed. Slowly, their resistance faded. They started to listen, to practice. For the first time, they felt the difference between arrogance and discipline. Dylan learned that his size meant nothing without balance. Marcus discovered control in movements he once thought were just brute force. Tyler realized speed without focus was useless. Miss Carter guided them patiently, never mocking their failures, never flaunting her superiority. She didn't want to break them anymore. She wanted to build them. And it worked. Their classmates noticed the change. The once feared bullies no longer shoved kids in hallways. Instead, they carried themselves differently, quieter, more focused, less desperate for attention. Respect returned not through fear but through growth. By the end of the semester, Dylan, Marcus, and Tyler weren't just students. They were leaders. The boys who once begged for forgiveness had learned how to give it, and how to earn it. On the last day of school, Miss Carter stood before her class. "Strength," she said, "isn't about breaking others. It's about protecting them. It's about knowing you can fight, but choosing peace. Never forget that." Her eyes met Dylan's, Marcus's, and Tyler's. They nodded, gratitude clear in their expressions. They weren't the same boys anymore. They had been humbled, challenged, and transformed. And as the final bell rang, the legend of the new teacher lived on. She hadn't just tamed the bullies. She had changed them forever.